Hello, everyone. This is Traci, an end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Today, I have the honor of welcoming Rabbi Heather Paul, a remarkable individual who, amid personal loss, has leaned deeply into her faith as a source of strength and guidance. Today, she's here to share with us how Jewish traditions assist us in remembering and honoring our deceased loved ones. Rabbi Heather, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Can you start off by telling us how you became a rabbi? What was your personal journey?
Yeah, it's a long one, but I'll give you the short version. I was I was raised culturally Jewish, but not with a whole lot of depth of understanding. And I mean certainly like family gatherings and things like that, but we weren't really a synagogue family, and I didn't do youth group or camp or any of those things people think of when you think of growing up with a lot of Jewishness around you. I discovered my Jewishness when I was in college at Hillel as a freshman, and sort of fell in love with it. And um, after many years of working in Hillel, started working in Hillel after my first grad program. I people had asked me multiple times, have you considered becoming a rabbi? Have you considered becoming a rabbi? And I had a lot of reasons why I didn't want to be a rabbi, and none of them were true. um, and ultimately, it was the Pulse nightclub shooting. The day after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, I was driving to work and listening to NPR and listening to this story and just crying. And I suddenly felt this. I mean, most people I know don't get a call. Like, I don't know that I would call it a calling even, but like, I don't know what else to call it. I was like, I have to be a rabbi. Like, I just like this voice was like inside of me, like, I have to be a rabbi. And it was like, no, you don't. Like, you are, doing a job that you love, and you're doing grief counseling, and like, you don't really need to like merge the two. Like, you've got it all covered. Like, you really don't. And like, besides, you can't drop out of your life and go to school full time for 5 years. Like, what are you talking about? But the more I tried to ignore that urge to become a rabbi, the louder it got. So when I found this wonderful program that was made for people who had already been in Jewish life for a long time, and who maybe couldn't go to school full time for 5 years, but was still very rigorous and very spiritually driven and very meaningful. The rabbinic program that I went to is called Aleph. So when I found that, I realized that there was a way for me to do this, and I went for it. So I'd always been very impacted emotionally by mass shootings, and I think that some part of me just felt like I don't know why that was the one that did it, or why that specifically was the moment, but it was just this need to like put more love into the world, I guess. And this was the best way I could think of to do that.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk Jewish traditions. When I think about Jewish traditions for honoring our deceased loved ones, I feel that they begin at the time of death, probably before that, and they continue throughout the family's entire ancestral lineage. Could you share with us the various rituals that are practiced when one of our loved one dies?
There are practices that are for the person who died, and there are practices that are for the mourners, and then there are practices that sort of encompass both. So when somebody dies, their body has to be thoroughly cleaned. There's generally a community called the Hever Kadisha, the Holy Friends, the Hever Kadisha, and they go through a rather elaborate process of cleansing and purifying the body with water, and ensuring that um, someone is with the body at all times. The idea is to never leave the body alone for until burial. And the reasoning behind this is that there's this idea that the soul is still hovering around the body, is still nearby in some way. And you don't want them to feel alone after experiencing death. So it's all very like careful and caring. And, people will sign up often to be shomrim. A shomer means watch or guard. So people will sign up for shifts to sit and guard and support, and be with the body until burial. Now, at the same time, when family members, parent, child, spouse, or sibling, they're in a phase that is known at that point as aninut. It's called it's mourning with like there's the term onen means like the mourner. And it's this period of very acute mourning, shock, things like that. And that period is considered to last from the time the person dies until burial. And the idea is that you don't want to be asking too much of those people during that time, out of consideration for them and out of consideration for the deceased. Which is part of why there's a Hever Kadisha in Jewish communities that comes and sort of takes care of this. And I sort of like to imagine them as these these, just sort of, it's a community of holy friends that sort of swoops in and takes care of the body so that those in Aninut don't need to think about it when they can't. From burial through the first 7 days, it's called Shiva, and Shiva means 7. And the people who are grieving will sit Shiva. And during Shiva, there are many customs that are designed to both support the mourners and support the soul of the person who died. So people who are mourning sit low to the ground. They don't dress up. They cover their mirrors. When you enter a house of mourning, you're not supposed to greet them. You're not supposed to say hello. There's something you say instead in Hebrew, and it translates to, "May you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Israel. May you be comforted among all of our people who are in mourning." And they're not really supposed to leave the house. The idea of a Shiva minyan, a group of people who comes to the house to pray with you, is you're not supposed to say certain prayers unless there are 10 people present. But instead of asking the mourner to go out of the house to go pray, the people come to the mourner's house and pray with them so that they don't have to miss those prayers, especially mourner's Kaddish, which is a prayer for the dead that you need to say around 10 people. The community comes and shows up and does that with them so that they don't have to miss that. So as you can imagine, a lot of these practices are with the comfort of the mourners in mind. Very it makes it easier. They don't have to leave the house. They don't have to think about food. Everyone's supposed to bring food. It's a very community care oriented practice. And like I said before, there's also the idea that the soul is still present at this time. So, the mourners and others are not doing things that a soul cannot do without a body, like looking in a mirror, or performing certain mitzvot, like wrapping, in observant communities. Many people will, wrap tefillin, which is like a prayer practice that's very physical, and you don't do that while you're in mourning because you're mourning and it's hard to get yourself to do things, and B, that's a mitzvah, that's a commandment that the person who's dead cannot follow because they no longer have a body. So the practices are designed to comfort the mourners, to comfort the avelim, those who are in mourning, and also designed to be comforting to the person who's died.
when my cousin passed away, they belonged to an Orthodox temple and or synagogue, and I remember that we were lucky enough because she died suddenly, that the rabbi allowed us to see the body, which you're usually not supposed to open up for people. But she was wrapped up in the white linen. And also, they put crystals under the eyelids. And yeah, they said that it was so that she would be able to go to the light or see where that was. And I just thought that that was really beautiful. It was honoring the body. And I know as end of life doula, when a person passes away, the family members, I always talk to the family members, and if they want to wash the body, we do that. We do things to honor the body. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, and talk about also the actual funeral.
Yeah, of course. The act of tahara, which is the pouring on of the water, is a way of honoring the body. Tahara means pure, and the idea is to just get them completely clean. A Jewish body is supposed to be buried whole, intact. That's why we don't do cremation. Um, and they're wrapped in the white linen, because it's supposed to it's a symbol of purity again, the white color. And it's also about simplicity. There's this message that in death everyone is equal, so it doesn't matter how wealthy you were or how poor you were or anywhere in between. Bodies are honored in the same way, and this simple white linen wrapping, it's called takrichin, and then buried in a simple pine coffin that can biodegrade, and so that the body returns to the earth, which is another way of honoring the body and honoring the earth and caring for both at the same time.
I know that after the first week after Shiva, there are other rituals or other milestones. And so if you can talk about that and how we honor even those that die, our grandparents, our great grandparents. If you could talk about that a little, that would be great.
Sure. I'll do the funeral first because I know I meant to do that. The funeral also has many different, ways of honoring the body, such, like you mentioned, we don't do a wake or any of those rituals that involve people seeing the body. That would be embarrassing to the soul. Immediate family members are often allowed to see the body for a few moments to say goodbye, but it's a closed coffin during the memorial. And there are a few key components to the memorial. One of them is saying a very special prayer called Amale Rachamim, which I sometimes translate it, God saturated in womb love, because it's the word rachamim is compassion, and it comes from rechem, which means womb. So it's God overflowing with mother love, with compassion. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous prayer. And it's one of the only prayers in which we say the name of the person who died. So often the rabbi or cantor will ask for the Hebrew name of the person who died, not only to have it on the kever, on the headstone, but also to put it into this prayer where we ask for sheltering eternal rest for this soul, for this person under the wings of Shekhinah, which is the divine presence. It's a really gorgeous prayer. There's that prayer and Mourner's Kaddish, which is a prayer that actually doesn't say anything about death at all. The words are all about praising God, and contrary to the idea that, like, oh, how could you praise at that time? The praise is also considered to be a way of honoring the life and memory of the person who died, because it verifies that their life was good, and that their life was worthy of praise, and that even in this moment of loss, there are things that are praiseworthy. And often the words themselves are very meditative. It's an Aramaic. It has a rhythm to it, and there's a feeling in it that's very comforting. And also, every time the prayer is said, that person's soul elevates a little bit higher. So it's a way of sending them home lovingly through this practice. And the other thing that happens at the funeral, I mean, technically, I think it's supposed to happen right when you hear that somebody's died, but at this point, in most communities, it's done right at the funeral. It's called Kriya, and it's a really powerful act of tearing. And in some communities, you hear that the person's died, and you immediately tear some of your clothing. In many communities now, someone will pass out black ribbons to the mourners. Again, that's parent, child, spouse, or sibling. And the mourners will tear the ribbon. And it's this physical act that honors the tear in our hearts, and the tearing of the soul from the body. And it's really, really powerful. So it's another important component. Other components include a hesped, a eulogy, and often the saying of Psalm 23 and a couple of other psalms. But one of the nice things about the Jewish funeral is that it actually isn't. It's not lengthy. It's not complicated. There are these few core prayers, and then you can fill in as you want. I've officiated memorials where there's lots of people sharing. I've officiated memorials where it's just, the bare bones, and that's all they, the basics, and that's all they want. And it, it has a lot of room for the mourners to fill in the ways that would be meaningful to them or not.
Thank you.
And then, another important moment is everybody shovels dirt onto the coffin, which is really powerful. And there's a practice of once you've shoveled the dirt onto the coffin, you don't hand the shovel to the next person. You put it in the dirt so that they have to reach and grab it unless they're physically incapable. And it's supposed to show that we're not in a hurry to do this. This is not something we are doing in a way that is easy. This is not easy. This is hard. And it honors, through this physical act of having to bend over and take the shovel, it honors the person who died, and acknowledging how hard this is. And it honors the grief that the family is feeling. Some people even try to lift the dirt with the back of the shovel instead of using the front of the shovel to symbolize how hard it is. It's all very symbolic. And there's something powerful too about hearing the thunk of the dirt on the coffin as you do that.
Sense of community is amazing. It's really, really nice. And then I know that the headstone, after a year, we have a headstone, and then we do that ceremony also.
Right. So in between Shiva and the yard site, which is the year mark of death, there's another mourning period called Shloshim, which means 30. So there are restrictions that are lifted after the 7 days. Often after 7 days, the mourners will go on a walk around the block, sort of acknowledge that, that they're going to try to return to their lives a little bit. But many for 30 days will not shave their beards if they're men, will not buy new clothes or go to a concert or, do something really, really joyful. And it's not because they shouldn't feel joy. It's because it's out of acknowledgement that it's really hard to go do those things. It's giving them a little bit of a break, from having to look their best or behave in certain ways. And after those 30 days, through the 7 days and the 30 days and the first year, traditionally you're saying mourner's Kaddish for the person who's died. If you're a parent, child, spouse, or sibling, you're saying mourner's Kaddish 3 times a day in a minyan of 10 people. Often in less observant communities, it's just as often as you can. And there are also memorial moments built into the Jewish calendar year that I find really powerful. They're called Yizkor, memorial services. And what I love about Yizkor is that we do them on festival holidays, Sukkot, Passover. So these moments when you might be remembering the person who died and sad about it in the middle of a joyful holiday and feeling alone, you get to gather with your community and have this moment of remembering and hear Al Malei Rachamim, that prayer that I mentioned, and say the mourner's Kaddish and spend a little time honoring that this holiday isn't the same without the person who died.
I
We also do it at Yom Kippur.
I absolutely love that. I hear from so many people that after the funeral, after a month, people they feel lonely because people aren't, the community isn't coming in, and so there's this big sense of loneliness, and that sense of community of coming in every day throughout that year, and to really honor that person who's passed away at those holidays. That's really significant.
And you can continue doing Yizkor long after that year. Because no holiday is the same after, somebody you love has died and isn't there. And you're always going to be remembering them at those special moments.
Yep.
So there's no time when you're not supposed to go to Yizkor. It's really beautiful. The other thing is, a lot of Jewish communities have a daily morning and evening minyan specifically for mourners, so that if you need that, where you can find it. And even in communities where that person may not typically be praying 2 or 3 times a day, it's comforting to know that you can, and that your community will be there, and you can add yourself to a list of people to call if they need a 10th person for a minyan. I always try to put myself on those lists because I don't ever want someone to not be able to say mourner's Kaddish, and you're supposed to say it with 10. So it's really a very caring act for people who need that.
Sounds like it. Now, how do these traditions foster intergenerational communication, or the passing down of stories, memories?
Mm-hmm. So there's no set ritualized way to do that. And we're all taught that Shiva is the time when you share memories, that the Hesped or eulogy should be a time for sharing memories, that Yizkor can be a time for sharing memories. And like I said, it's not ever prescribed except for in the Hesped and the eulogy. But we all know, we all in clergy school, we were all trained that when you go to a Shiva minyan, you're helping people share memories. That's what you're supposed to do. Break out the photo albums if people want to do that. Always ask what's your favorite memory of this person, or what did you love about this holiday with this person. You're taught not to avoid it because it's not the person who's grieving isn't thinking about it.
Now, this act of remembering our ancestors and those loved ones goes beyond our families. There are significant rituals where we remember our Jewish community, such as Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Could you elaborate on the importance of a collective memory and how we remember our community?
Yeah. So there are a couple of different moments in the calendar that are dedicated to remembering those who died in the Holocaust. And one of them is it's in November. It's for Kristallnacht, which was a night that is seen as like a real initiation of a real turning point in Holocaust history, when Nazis went and shattered glass. It's called the Night of the Shattered Glass. Went and shattered, windows of stores and homes and synagogues, and create a lot of other damage at the start of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And then there's an International Holocaust Remembrance Day in January that marks the liberation of Auschwitz. And then there's Yom HaShoah, like Holocaust Remembrance Day, as it's observed in Israel and the United States in April. And many communities won't do something for all three of those days, but will do one of them. Some will do all three, but most will do Yom HaShoah, which is the day in April. And I have to say it's changing quite a bit, because we're losing survivors. Survivors are dying. And Yom HaShoah was usually about a survivor coming and sharing their story. And then we would sing some songs and, do the mourner's Kaddish. And, really it was a chance for that intergenerational learning and feeling connected. In the absence of survivors, we're hearing a lot more now from second generation and third generation folks who can tell their parents' stories or their grandparents' stories. Storytelling is a really important part of these communal loss moments, because that's how the memories get passed down, whether it's storytelling at a shiva about an individual, or it's storytelling at a communal space about a communal tragedy that's happened. Those stories are part of what keeps the memories alive.
I remember being in Israel on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and it was my first time in Israel. Yeah, Oren has family, so we go often, or try to. And yeah, I mean, just we were actually driving, and everyone stops, gets out of their car, the sirens are going, and it is very humbling and touching, and it really does give you a sense of being part of community and remembering that we have certain responsibilities also.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are other, and that's extremely powerful and only done in Israel to my knowledge, but there are other ways that people are remembering, such as, they'll try to read as many of the 600 million names, or as many of the 6 million names as possible. So they'll do like 6 hours where people will sign up to read names out loud, 1 hour each or a half hour each, to try to get through as many of the names as possible. Or in parts of Europe, there's an art project called the Stolperstein, the Stumbling Stones, where in a lot of cobblestoned areas, there will suddenly be like a gold or bronze stone that has the name of the Jewish family or the individual who lived there, and when they died and where they died, if they have that information. So you're literally stumbling across the memory of somebody who lived there, and it's in the street, and you can't ignore that somebody used to live here who perished in a concentration camp.
There are other things that we do. Tikkun Olam is act of contributing to society or repairing it. How does that play a part in honoring our loved ones?
Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of people like to honor their loved ones by doing something good in their honor, by doing a mitzvah, doing a good deed, giving tzedakah, giving charity in their honor. And if you think about, different like foundations that are named for somebody who died from certain illnesses, or if you think about some of the incredible, walks for suicide prevention and things like that, I think that it's, all of that can be seen as Tikkun Olam, as an act of repairing and healing. All of the things we do to honor somebody's memory in a powerful way, in a meaningful way, can be seen as an act of repairing the world and repairing our own souls. Tikkun Olam and Tikkun HaNefesh, repairing the world, repairing our souls. It can be a really meaningful. It's one of the questions that we tend to ask people later, not right after somebody's died, but like, maybe during Shloshim or whatever. What is a way you can honor the memory of this person? What's something you admired about them, and how can you bring that trait into your life? I actually created a I don't know how to describe it. I created a practice that is, it's called a Musar practice for grief. And Musar is a tradition in which you think about different midot, different character traits, and try to improve yourself in that character trait. You usually pick one per month, and you would do some study on it and some learning, and you would really focus on it. So, for example, Anava is humility, and you might think about, like, where am I too arrogant, and where do I hold back too much, and work on yourself. And one of the things that I think is really powerful is that in grief work, you can ask somebody, what did you admire in the person who died, and how can you improve in that trait in your life? So an additional way for people who are grieving, especially if they aren't a parent, child, spouse, or sibling, and are looking for a concrete set of practices to do, or if they are one of those mourners and they need something in addition, is to, make a list of traits that you admired in the person who died, and try to do some Tikkun Olam, try to do some healing of the world and of yourself by growing in those traits in that person's honor. I think about my grandmother of blessed memory, who just was like the most loving, effusive, over the top almost with how much she said, I love you. So one of the things I tried to do was say, I love you a little more in her honor, as a tikkun, and as practice of thinking about my own midah, my own character trait of love. Like, how could I show that a little more? I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does.
I did a write-up on it, and you can find it on Ritual Well. It's called a Musar practice for grief.
Thank you. Technology. As the world becomes more interconnected, how have Jewish rituals evolved to become more inclusive? Have we integrated elements from other cultures or faiths into some of our own traditions?
Mm-hmm. So it depends on the Jewish community. I like to use guided meditation a lot in my memorial services. I do one where I invite people to consider, I do a guided meditation that invites people to bring the person who died into their hearts. And I use the five senses. What did this person smell like? What was their voice like when they spoke with you? What were their eyes like when they looked at you? Can you feel their arms around you? What was it like to hug them? What would you be saying if you could speak to them right now? What would they say back to you? Sort of give people time to engage that way. And there are meditative practices that are part of Jewish tradition, but it's definitely something that has grown in popularity in Jewish tradition as a result of conversation with other spiritual practices that use meditation a lot. I think that's something that's definitely been brought into more Jewish spaces as a result.
Moving on to a personal, something more personal. I know that over the last few years, you've experienced both profound loss and joy. Could you tell us about how those experiences have influenced your approach to memory honoring practices?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was on an infertility and pregnancy loss journey over 5.5 years that, thank God, led to the birth of my beautiful 1-year-old daughter, Ella. Um, and during those 5.5 years, I found that there actually wasn't a whole lot available for Jewish practice or ritual wise. Um, Around infertility and pregnancy loss, because when these rituals were written, there was just so much of it that like you couldn't honor every single miscarriage. It was like it was just and or you couldn't there was no way. And there's this idea that you're not supposed to bury the baby if, unless it's I think 30 days old, or at least. So, I mean, there's a lot of, and there was a lot of reasons for that. Back then it was very, very common that most of the children would not survive. You're not supposed to name a child until they're 8 days old for that reason. And I might be wrong about the 30 days. I may have to look that up, but it's, it's a short amount of time. So as a result, there wasn't a whole lot. There's more now, it's growing, but I wrote my own rituals and prayers, and then published them and shared them like really, really widely. I shared them with Jewish fertility clinics. I shared them with individuals I knew. I wrote a lot on Facebook in a very public way. Not public posts, because I wasn't going to go that far, but like really widely read posts about my experience. And I shared a lot about the process and a lot about the different prayers that I wrote for the different points on the infertility journey, including a prayer for before an egg retrieval and all kinds of different things. I also did find a lot of wisdom in our tradition that had not been, I don't think has been properly mined or utilized, which is that many of the women in the Torah are, and Tanakh and the Torah and Nevi'im and prophets are coping with infertility. It's something that our ancestors were certainly wrestling with and afraid of, and was a very real issue. And I began to think about those women a lot. And one of the things that I did to honor their stories and mine was I wrote a script for that was like it's like a bibliodrama, an imagined support group for the infertile women of Tanakh, and gave them each a voice and like let them talk a little bit about their story and talk to each other. And in doing that, I realized that each of them was representing a feeling that I had along the journey. So I found ways basically to use our tradition to comfort myself and to provide support for others, even though there weren't like this is what you do for a miscarriage, in like very traditional sources. I created a mikvah ritual for a miscarriage as well, which was really, really powerful.
It seems that you really blend a lot of tradition with innovation and creativity, and you do that so well. Are there other instances, or are there other types of rituals that you've done that with, where you have infused our traditional Jewish rituals with some additional creativity and your own personal touch?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is I was working with a family that was going to be living far away from where the parent was going to be buried. And they were feeling really sad about that. They couldn't go to like visit the grave. And I suggested that they take some of the earth with them, like after pouring it on the coffin, that they take some of the earth that would have gone on the coffin and take it with them, so that they, in a jar, so that they have the earth itself that is holding that's holding the parent. So that's one like small innovation that actually has been really powerful to offer people who aren't going to live close to where the person is buried. And the other thing that comes to mind is that we all had to innovate during the pandemic and during lockdown. And I think it was the end of March 2020 when I offered a course, an online course for virtual virtual memory circles. And the reason I felt confident doing that was because I'd already done a couple in different situations. I had there had been a camper that I'd worked with who had died by suicide, and all of his fellow campers were scattered across the country at different universities at that point, but I knew they were going to want to come together in some way. And I also knew they weren't going to fly out for a funeral. It wasn't going to happen. So I, just sort of gathered them and did a combination of, put together, basically, a little bit of music that reminded us of camp, and invited people to share memories, and invited people to share how they were feeling, and basically did like a combination. I called it a virtual memory circle because it was a combination ritual and like memory circle sharing. So I shared with clergy from like across denominations, actually, how to do this in a way that was loving and respectful, and that made space for memory shares. And we were all very new at it at that point, but it was nice to be able to offer something based on my experience when it was literally a month in. And one of my first thoughts as the lockdown was happening was like, oh my God, people are going to have to grieve alone. And I just don't ever want that. I just don't ever want that. I don't want anyone to feel isolated in their grief ever. And they're going to people feel isolated in grief because they do, but I don't want them to ever not have a space to do a funeral, because we need that. Like ritual loss is another kind of loss. And so like first you're grieving the person who died, and then you're grieving that you don't get to grieve them in the way that you would want to honor them. And it's just like the idea of that just broke my heart. Like I just needed to like put something in the world immediately and try to ensure that people would get the space that they need, even if it's not in the way that they hoped or had planned to get it.
We're almost at time here. It's gone fast. For individuals who might be inspired to create their own personal rituals, and during their times of grief, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah. I think the first piece of advice is that you don't need a rabbi or a spiritual leader to create a ritual for you. You actually have the tools that you need. I think one of the most important pieces is to think about what change you would like the ritual to make for you. Whether it's a change in attitude or feeling or whatever. Ritual doesn't mark change, it makes change. So what is the change that you want to affect? And then think about different ways to make that change happen. So if it's a release, if you want to like let go of something, many traditions use water as a cleansing thing. Is there a water component? If it's or is it a burial? I know somebody who carried a stone with her for a week and then buried it after a miscarriage because there wasn't a body to bury, and she felt like she needed a burial. And I thought that was beautiful. So what you want is to think about what is the change that you want to see, and then what is the way to externalize it, whether it's art or writing or an act of tearing, an act of releasing in water, what's the spiritual technology that you want to use to make that change, and then make sure that there's space to reflect before and after, and to say either internally or out loud what it is you're hoping to accomplish, and then to acknowledge it afterward. So it's think about the change you want to see, acknowledge that you're trying to make that change, and then do the action, whatever it is, and then acknowledge that it's happened. So I think anyone can do it, and I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, and also it's not a magic wand. So if the change doesn't magically happen, that's okay. The worst thing that happens if it doesn't work is that you've hopefully had a meaningful experience and learned something else about yourself and about the way you grieve and the way you remember.
That's very good advice. I love that. Ritual doesn't mark change, it makes change. That's great. Rabbi Heather, I'm immensely grateful for your time today. Thank you so much. How can our viewers reach out to you or follow your work?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak with you about this. They can follow my website. It's scatteredleaves.net. And I think that's probably the best way.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the blog, or just bookmark the website, know that it's there. I'm really happy to help people craft rituals, Jewish or otherwise. I love ritual innovation around grief, but also around just about anything. So I'm really happy to support people in the process of ritual design.
Folks, if there is one takeaway from our conversation today, let it be this. You are not alone. In times of loss and remembrance, we are surrounded by a vast community of souls, both present and departed. There is support, there is understanding, and there's a shared journey that unites us all. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. If you've any questions or reflections, please comment below or reach out directly. And if you found this video to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.